Heavy Metal Detectors podcast is brought to you in conjunction with and inspired by the Heavy Metal Detectors Facebook group. If you are looking for a place to connect with other detectorists in your area, visit the Heavy Metal Detectors Facebook page and join a group in your state. Start sharing your latest finds, post tips, and ask questions with those in your area. Just search Heavy Metal Detectors on Facebook. Enjoy the fun. You'll be glad you did. And here's your host of the Heavy Metal Detectors podcast, Sydney Covey.
Welcome to the Heavy Metal Detectors podcast. This is your host, Sydney Covey. This is part 2 of our interview with Adam Kearley of YouTube's D-Tekt Sussex. We hope you enjoyed part 1 and we hope you enjoy part 2. Again, part 2 picks up right where part 1 left off. So Adam, we've covered a lot of stuff. When you obtain a new permission, and say you're on a tight schedule, you're going to go out and you're going to get 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. How do you concentrate where you're going to detect that first time when you're limited for time?
I think it'll depend a little bit on the location and what's there. I think just going back to what I said before about finding areas on the land where people may have had people activity, for want of a better term. So buildings, water sources, a nearby church, that kind of thing. If you've got that on the land, always go there first and detect around those areas first. If your time's limited, focus on those areas where you're more likely to find things that people have dropped because people have been there. It's better to do that than to just find a field and walk into the middle and hope for the best. If you haven't got anything like that, if it's just a large square field of open land, no buildings, no structures, nothing to sort of guide you, I would probably just go down one of the boundaries. I get a lot of success going on a field like that where if you find one of the boundaries, say there's a fence going down one side that's the boundary of the field, go to that fence, maybe go a few feet away from the fence and just do one line along the length of that fence. Because generally if someone's walking in a field, they'll walk around the outside. They won't walk straight across. A lot of people just walk around the boundary and follow the boundary around to get to where they want to go, especially if it's a very large field. So generally what I will do is I'll follow that boundary along and I'll find more finds along the boundary than I will dead centre of the field. When I did the manor house I mentioned just now a couple of years ago, I did exactly the same thing there, and I found more old coins, more historical coins along the boundary than I did in the middle. So if you really are pressed for time and there's no obvious signs of activity that you can go towards and feel like there's going to be some activity that you can pick up some finds from, go along the boundary. That's where a lot of people are going to be dropping things.
And then for someone that's never detected on a beach or around water, what's some advice or tips for that kind of scenario when you're going to be beach detecting and water detecting?
Yeah, I've done a lot of beach detecting on my channel. I do beach, field and park. I do a bit of everything. I've done a lot of beach detecting. I love the beach. It is a bit of a specialist place to detect. It's very different from detecting a field. The areas that you're going to find items are very, very different. The beaches in my area, obviously it'll vary a lot around the world, but my area, the beaches tend to be covered in shingle, lots of pebbles. There'll be a small amount of sand where the water comes in and out, the tides come in and out, and then obviously you'll have the sea coming in. So on the dry end of things, certainly on the pebbles, if you've got dry sand, that'll tend to be where you find a lot of modern items, modern coinage, a lot of rubbish as well on the beaches. If you go down to the wet sand, that's where you'll tend to find jewellery, especially rings. People go swimming in the sea, their hands get cold, their hands shrink and shrivel, and rings come off in the sea very quickly and easily. So if you want to find something a bit more substantial, expensive, bit of jewellery, that's usually a good place to go. And just look for places on the beach where people might congregate. If it's a tourist-based beach, are there any shops? Is there a pier? If it's less touristy based, maybe look at the local history and see if there's any old villages, towns that maybe used to exist. There's a cliff nearby me that used to have a fishing village on it. It's no longer there. A lot of it's fallen down into the sea, so I'll concentrate there on my finds. In terms of the machine you use, most single frequency machines will struggle on the beach. There are some that will cope with it. I use the Simplex a lot on the beach, and you can adjust that very well to cope with salt water. The issue with the salt water is the salt is a mineral. So the area is heavily mineralized, which gives chatter and false signals on a metal detector. So a lot of single frequency machines won't quite manage that very well. The Simplex does if you set it up correctly. But the best machine to go for would be a simultaneous multi-frequency machine on that kind of environment. They tend to handle the mineralization a lot better. So since I've got the Legend last year when that came out, my beach finds have gone through the roof with that new technology. So yeah, if you're looking for a machine, there are some single frequencies which will do it fine, but a multi-frequency machine would be the best thing to go for.
And that's great advice. We the part of the states I'm from, we don't have a lot of beaches, so it's a lot of freshwater detecting when you do go around water. But we do have a lot of people that travel to Florida and go to those areas with the sea and detect. So that's a great some great advice there. Just outside of that, what's we've talked about some tips for the beginners, but kind of adding into that, what's some other tips and advice that you would give to that beginner that's just getting into the field? Besides the machine and doing the research, to kind of help be more successful?
I think the most important thing, especially for a beginner in field detecting especially, is to take it very, very slow. And I mean that with your walking and your swing speed. Very sort of early on, if you're asking people for advice, they'll tell you to overlap the swing. So the coil will make a sweep. Your next sweep will overlap the sweep that you've just done, so you're not missing any land. But if you do that and you get a good rhythm with your swing and you speed up a little bit because you're maybe not finding much, you're getting a bit frustrated, or you just want to quickly find something, if you speed up your pace, those swings are going to spread out a little bit more and you're going to start missing land. Also, if you swing too fast on a metal detector, you will miss targets. You need to keep that coil slow. So, but like I said earlier, the whole thing's a learning curve. It's a long process. You will learn things over a long period of time. The same applies to the individual hunt that you're on. Make sure you slow down. Make sure you take your time. It's not the kind of hobby that you need to feel anxious or frustrated with. If you get into that point, then you do need to just take a break. It's supposed to be a relaxing hobby, and if you keep your swing nice and slow, you will find more things over the land that you cover.
And I think that's one reason a lot of people get into the hobby and then get out, is they get frustrated. They have higher expectations of finding valuables, and they struggle with learning the machine because they don't get the machine out and test it and read the material. They just buy a machine, go out a few times, and then they're frustrated because they're not finding anything but trash and rubble. So that's some great points there. Keeping it fun, keeping it slow, keeping it relaxing, and staying in the hobby instead of just giving up.
Definitely, that's something I try to focus on in my videos as well. I try to make my videos quite relaxing, quite easy to watch, so you don't feel anxious or het up when you're watching them. But I think one of the things I do with my channel, if you watch a lot of YouTube videos, you'll see a lot of hunts. I'm not criticizing people for doing this, but you'll see a lot of hunts where they'll only find the really nice stuff. You won't see them find the iron nail or the pull tab or the bottle cap. You'll only see them find the really nice finds, the good coins, the good jewellery, the historical stuff. And what a lot of these channels are doing is they're going out over maybe 3 or 4 weeks and doing 3 or 4 hunts over 3 or 4 weekends, finding lots of good stuff, filming it all, and then presenting it in one video. Which, again, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're watching that as a beginner and you don't realise that that's over several weeks and you don't see the 5 bin bags worth of rubbish that they've found alongside all of the good stuff, then the impression you'll get of the hobby is that you'll go out and you'll only find coins, jewellery, historical items. You won't be finding all the rubbish. And as we all know, as detectorists, you always find more bad stuff than you find good. So what I try to do on my channel is I can't always fit every find into a 20, 30-minute video, but I'll show all of the good stuff, but I'll also show a representative sample of the not so good stuff. So you'll see ring pulls, you'll see bottle caps, you'll see iron nails and things come up on my videos if that's what I found that day, so that you get a sense of how that hunt has actually been for me that day, rather than just showing the hero finds, the really, really nice stuff. I do see my channel as a bit of a vlog, a bit of a record of my hunt, rather than just showing off the best things. And I just think that's not that people are being dishonest by not doing that, but I just feel like that's a very more honest way of conducting videos, and for beginners to watch and get a better sense of how the hobby's going to be, especially when they're first starting out.
Yeah, exactly. I recently went on a hunt just a few days ago. Very small property. First signal was a double-headed axe.
Nice.
After that, it was just the trash and the rubbish. Iron nails, pop cans, but finding that one thing made the whole hunt, and that was my first axe head. Dates late 1800s, early 1900s. So you've always got to keep that in mind and enjoy the good finds, and the bad finds. You got to look at it as you're taking out the trash for the next time when you're there. It opens up more good finds.
Absolutely. It doesn't happen that often, but there have been a few beach hunts where I've come away with nothing good. It's only been trash. It's only been, sharp nails and things off the beach. But there's 2 ways to look at that. Number one, I've had a good time on the beach. I've been out in the fresh air. I've had the sea crashing on the shore next to me. I've had the birds in the sky. Lovely morning, or whatever it is, on the beach. And I've taken some of that trash and those sharp objects especially off of the beach. A lot of children on the beach running barefoot. If you've got that 3-inch nail off of the beach, that's one less child that's going to have a nail through their foot, essentially. So you are doing a service to the local community by doing that, even if you haven't found anything good for yourself. And again, those videos, even if I don't find anything, I'll still put them out on the channel because it shows how metal detecting is really for beginners to watch, and hopefully not get a false idea of what the hobby's going to be.
And that's great. That's how I started into the hobby, was watching YouTube videos. Watched YouTube videos to decide which machine I wanted. But it does kind of give you that false sense of hope that when you get out there, you're going to find this rare coin or this rare piece of history. So you've really got to be able to distinguish and know what's going on, like you've said in those videos. So I think it's awesome that you're doing things on your channel the way you're doing them. And it's going to be beneficial to a lot of beginners out there.
Thank you. Yeah, I do try and keep things as sort of straightforward and honest and open as I can on the channel, especially if it's been a bad hunt. I'll say it's been a bad hunt and still put it out. But yeah, it's amazing how many people out there watch YouTube videos and even some of the television programs out there now, which are showing metal detecting and relic hunting. And again, the TV show will only show the good stuff. They won't show much of the bad stuff. and they'll get the buzz from it, they'll get the interest in it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having the hope to find something good, as long as you've got the knowledge that there's a good chance you won't. I think it's more important that you've got the knowledge that you probably won't than the hope that you will. There's nothing wrong with hoping for a good thing, and I think if you're doing metal detecting and you're not hoping for something really good, then there may be something wrong. But if you're expecting to find something good, then that's where the problem really is.
Right. And then, the one thing I want to talk about to kind of try to wrap things up is, we always try to talk about technique and the things needed when detecting. And one of the big things we run into where I'm from is people not putting their plugs back. Can you talk about how important it is to make sure we dig that proper plug and put those plugs back and preserve those areas?
It is absolutely vital that you learn how to dig a plug correctly, in a way that isn't going to damage not just the land, but if it's in pasture, for example, the grass or anything in the local environment. And it's even more important to make sure that you put that plug back in a way that makes it invisible, so that nobody knows that you've been on that location. It's something which, if you've got permission to hunt on land and you go out for a few hours, you come back and you've left holes or you've left plugs that haven't been put back properly, within a few days the grass has died, that landowner's got a very ugly looking piece of land, or they've had to go back filling in holes, you're probably not going to be allowed to detect there again, and other detectorists aren't allowed either. If you're detecting on public land, so parks, even beaches, the local councils will cotton on to that quite quickly, that metal detectorists are there and that they're not repairing the ground that they're digging up, and they will put bans in place. There's a place in the UK, just in the north of the country at the minute, that's looking to impose a metal detecting ban in its county. There's petitions and things against it, but that really comes down to metal detecting hobby having a bad reputation, and a lot of that is down to not filling in holes, not looking after the land that we are detecting on. I think of it almost like an art form. If you can dig a plug, retrieve your item, put the plug back, and spend some time on it, make sure that it's invisible, make sure you can't see that it's been taken up, then that is job well done. That's in a lot of ways more important than finding the good stuff. It's just leaving the land as you found it and showing the metal detecting off in a really good light to the landowners.
I agree. We as metal detectors have to look at it as we're each a steward for the hobby, and my actions and reactions can affect the next detectors that's coming by and trying to detect in those same areas.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So it'll affect other metal detectorists. It'll affect your chances of getting further permissions, possibly even further areas of land on that same permission. You may only have permission to detect one field. If you put your plugs back correctly, they may give you permission to detect on other areas. The farm permission that I've mentioned a few times in this video has a lot of different areas in. There's a couple of fields that have been used for events. So there's a lot of modern coinage and unusual items in those fields. There's a field next to it which has been used mostly as a car park for the events. You get a very different level of find there. There's a manor house with an 18th century manor house with gardens, which have a lot of history. And initially I was only given 2 of those fields. But when they saw me putting the plugs back and looking after the land and just making sure that it looked like I hadn't been there, they then started giving me more areas of that location. So then I gained the car park field. Then I gained access to some of the 18th century gardens around the manor house and started to find even better items out of those fields. So it's from a selfish point of view, you may gain from it by getting more land from the landowner. But from a more public point of view, it's you are representing the hobby, and it's a hobby you're representing not just to that landowner, but to the people that landowner knows and will talk to, and other land in the area will then become unavailable. If you're digging again in a public place, there's also a health risk. If you leave a hole, someone could trip on that, not realise it's there, put the foot on it, and hurt themselves. So it's important on so many levels to make sure that we leave the land as we found it, for the hobby, for yourself, and for others.
Great point there. Metal detecting as a hobby has such a black eye in a lot of places already that, it makes it hard to gain permissions and dig in parks and do those type things. So I love that point. And that's what we're trying to teach here through the podcast, is to be great stewards of the hobby, and trying to teach those beginners the techniques and the things necessary to make it a fun hobby and to protect the hobby.
Yeah, definitely. It's great that you're doing that. It really is. A lot more people need to learn how to do that. When I was at Detectival a couple of weeks ago, as I said, you get a few hundred people on that land and very different opinions as to how plugs should or should not be put back. And you do find a lot of holes that people have dug and just not put back very well at all. And it is quite annoying, because you then have to spend time putting it back so that the landowner doesn't feel like the event has been destructive to their land and you've put a negative spin on it. So, if someone else has left a bad plug, we then have to spend time filling it in to make sure that the hobby is still viable and still carries on.
Right, and that kind of situation could lead to where that festival's looking for a place to host or no longer exist.
Yeah, absolutely, and that would be a real shame, because events like Detectival, I'm sure you have similar ones in the States, where you get a few hundred people together. It's a festival atmosphere. You get some really good land to detect on. There's entertainment. There's like-minded people. There's experts on site. A lot of brands and manufacturers and shops and things selling their wares. It's a really good social event, highlight of the year. And if those things were to start disappearing, then we all suffer. Every one of us suffers. It's it's really important to make sure you're looking after the land.
Awesome. And then just to wrap things up, one final question.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about it and we've discussed it, but that number one tip that you would give the beginner that's just starting in the hobby, that doesn't know anything, that's maybe talked to some friends, let's just go over that number one tip again.
It's the number one tip. I think the one I mentioned earlier was that it is a long, slow process. It's a learning process that will never end. It's one that you keep learning as you go. And I think connected to that is, when you choose the machine that you're starting with, make sure that machine is appropriate for your knowledge and experience level. If you choose a machine that's too complicated and too high end, that learning curve is going to be extremely steep. And in most cases, people who buy a machine that's too complicated will probably not be detecting in 6 months' time. So I would say, do your research on the machines. Make sure you have something which is simple, easy to use. If you're just starting out, if you don't know much of the terminology, if you don't really know much more than what sensitivity or ground balance is, or if you don't even know what those are, make sure your machine is an entry-level machine that has the basic settings on, that you can learn and really set the foundation of good metal detecting moving forward. And then in 2-3 years' time, when you've got the experience, you've mastered that machine, you've mastered your techniques, you know what you're doing, then you can get a higher-end machine and start learning, continuing that learning curve with the next machine. It's what I had when I started. I'm not a nomad, but when I first started, I had a very basic Garrett machine. A good solid starter machine. I outgrew that machine within a few months because I was going out every week and just building the knowledge as I went. I got the Simplex, and that was the right decision. I think if I'd got a higher end machine at that point, I wouldn't have been ready for it. I wouldn't have understood the higher level functions of the machine. So getting the simplex was the best idea for me. It was easy to use, it was functional, it was strong, it was powerful. And then going ahead a couple of years to last year, when the Legend came out, and that was the next step for me. And that was the next sort of milestone on my journey, where at that point I had a lot more settings to learn, a lot more features and functions to learning about the different sets of frequencies on the machine. That's my learning stage, and I've got to the point now where I'm pretty happy with that. And if a more complicated machine came along, then that would be my next step on the journey. So remember, it's a long, slow journey that you will take, especially if you're not going out every single week. Take your time, enjoy it. It's a fantastic hobby to get you out and about and get some exercise, get some fresh air, and who knows, maybe even find some nice history as well.
Adam, we thank you for being on the show. We want to make sure everybody goes out and checks out D-Tekt Sussex. Give it a follow and make sure you're keeping up with Adam's adventure and journeys throughout his metal detecting, and learn some tips and tricks from Adam. Adam, again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And we look forward to talking to you again, hopefully sometime in the near future.
I look forward to it. Fantastic.
All right. Thank you, Adam. This has been the Heavy Metal Detectors Podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. We hope that you'll stay tuned for further episodes. Again, follow us on Facebook and now on YouTube. Also, don't forget to give D-Tekt Sussex a follow on YouTube. And as always, check out metaldetectingstuff.com for all your metal detecting needs.